This is the revolutionary radio, run by none other than the most runaway slave called Gillie Priest, in association with the World Wide Web. This control even the ebb that flows in the sea. Revolutionary radio. Gillie, live free.
This is Revolutionary Radio, and I'm Russ Gillie Priest. Today, I would like to take this opportunity to look at how leadership was developed in this country historically, and how leadership was developed in this country historically is not unlike in any other nation on the face of the earth. The only difference is that in some countries, true leadership came to the fore, while in other nations, leadership that was imposed upon the people from without came to the fore. So let's spend a moment and look at the situation with Jamaica. The leadership that came out of the collective consciousness of the people of this nation is a leadership that has disappeared from 1938 from within this country. And henceforth, from 1938, a political leadership of a quasi-political class has been imposed upon this country to this very day. Nations are formed basically out of two concepts. A nation may be formed out of the commonality of ethnicity. But you say, for example, in ancient Europe, you have the French, the Greek, the Romans. These are nations that were formed out of one ethnic group, nations that were identified by these specific ethnic groups. Today we have nations that were formed out of ideas. Today we have nations that were formed out of an economic system. Like, for example, the nation of Jamaica was formed out of an economic system, the colonial economic mercantile system. It was not formed out of a specific ethnic group. It was not formed out of an idea to benefit the masses of this nation. Jamaica was formed specifically as an economic conduit belt to develop England in particular, and otherwise all of Europe. Africans were never brought to this country for any other reason than to produce sugarcane, banana, molasses, all of the necessities that Europe in general and England in particular determined they needed. All Asian nations were developed out of an ethnic-based people that could identify today what you would call in Africa tribal-based people, even though we do not ascribe to that term. Those were nations, not tribes, they were nations. The Fulanis, the Ashantis, the Yoruba, these were nations that were formed out of particular ethnic groups. We in the Western world, we in the particularly in the Caribbean, were developed out of a situation of total exploitation for the benefit of Europe. The only nations and people on the face of the earth that exist today that was developed for a particular economic reason and purpose. From around 1509 to 1838, we bore the lashes that fueled Europe. We produced the raw labor that powered Europe to what it is today. Not oil, not gas, not electricity, not combustible engine. None of that developed Europe. It was the raw blood of the African people that powered Europe right into through its development process to to the point where it can say mercantile capitalism dominated the world. Today we call it imperialism. So in this struggle, there was a particular collective consciousness of the masses that produces its leaders. Paul Bogle didn't fall out of the sky. Sam Sharp didn't drop out of the sky. Marcus Garvey didn't drop out of the sky. Nana didn't drop out of the sky. None of our ancient leaders didn't fall out of the sky. They were directly connected to the context of which our people found those were our true leaders. But then, by 1838, the British in Jamaica realized that changes was going to have to come one way or the other. So what did they do? They started to foment a different set of leaders. These leaders were men that were pointed out as reasonable leaders, educated leaders, intellectual, men of class and distinction, even though some of them could not read and write. But they were seen as intellectuals based upon their mulatto colors. So by 1838, the true leaders of this country that came out of the developed consciousness of the people was suppressed. Today, we are the descendants of Paul Bogle. We are the descendants of Sam Sharp. We are the descendants of Marcus Garvey. We are the descendants of Nani. We are the descendants of Kojo. We are the descendants of Okompo. We are the descendants of that. Those people have been eliminated from the collective consciousness of the people. Today we speak of members of the People's National Party and the Jamaica Labour Party, and no one can tell us from their very inception where they came from. You want to know where they came from? Go back to the formation of the Constitution of this country, where they self-elect and self-appointing themselves to go to Europe to sit with the British Privy Council and write up a constitution that was never brought before the people for approval. A constitution that approved the maintenance of the colonial system for a further 5 years from 1962 to 1957, where they could not make any changes to the constitution, where all colonial offices and officers had to be maintained by a people who were being so-called free in 1962. And it is from that class, that externally imposed leadership class upon this country, that presently sit today in the House of Parliament, calling themselves national leaders. I have never heard. The subject matter I would like to discuss today is education. There appears to be a lack of understanding amongst the common people when we speak of education. What is education? Is education intelligence? Is education about just gathering information? Does education require any type of thinking outside of memory? So let's spend a moment and try to figure out what is this thing we call education. Why is it that throughout the so-called third world, education has yet to benefit the people? What is so elusive about education that it appears that we can't grasp it, while other nations and other people other than the Africans has been able to grasp it, to the point where we have been seen as inept because of this inability to grasp it. We have been classed as inferior because it appears that education cannot benefit us. So we're going to look at this term education, and we're going to look at it from this practical sense, not from an academic definition of what the term education means, because that's where they always seem to evade us in their definition of terms that are put together by the Websters and the Oxfordians that give us the definitions to the very words that we use over which we have no power. Responsible nations, and I'm using that word in a particular context, nations that foster leaders that lead for the benefit of their people. We're not going to get into whether they're leading right or wrong. That's their own self-determination. Education is a concept that was brought forth to give the people, the masses, the necessary information in order to foster the ideas of the leadership forward. So what I mean is like this. If a nation determines that it needs, in order to better the medical standard of its people, they're going to produce more doctors. If the national leaders determine that they need more scientists in order to develop new technology in a certain direction, then they foster that form of education in the higher institution. These faculties that exist within the universities, when I say faculties, the different aspect of teaching where they give you different degrees. You get a degree in philosophy, you get a degree in economics, you get a degree in engineering, you get a degree in agriculture, you get a degree. These are different faculties where the nation determines they need people to be educated in order to move their nation forward. Education is the process of educating the people to think in a certain way, or not even to think, but to adapt a certain belief, because education doesn't require no thinking. It just requires conformity to the ideas from above. That's all education is, that you conform to the ideas that's being produced from above, the leaders of the country. You're not required to think. So you spend 4 years going through a university and you study medicine, for example, is because the leaders and the pharmaceutical companies determine that, okay, in the direction in which we're going to take the country, we need X amount of doctors, X amount of nurses, X amount of whatever the different categories within medicine. Then we must ask ourselves now, since we're dealing with the African liberation struggle from within the context of Jamaica, because the context of Jamaica is no different from any other country in Africa. Our education system are turning out graduates that's been educated to a system that has ceased to exist for more than 50 years ago. You are being educated for a purpose and a reason that no longer exists. That's the reason why Jamaica can be turning out graduates by the hundreds, if not by the thousands, that cannot find job. So you walk around here, for example, you got a degree in, let's say, agriculture, and you studied in an institution that was formed out of a banana and sugarcane production system. So now you're an expert in planting banana, but guess what? The world no longer needs bananas. The world no longer needs your coconuts. The world no longer needs a sugar cane. So who's going to employ you with a degree in agriculture that concentrated on a set of products that the world no longer needs? You have been educated to the past. So your education has become a burden to you. So you sit behind closed door and ask yourself, what is happening? How am I, as an educated individual, cannot find a job? Well, guess what your first mistake is? The question that you ask a job. Why didn't you ask yourself, oh, you can create a job? No, it takes a different mentality to create a job than it takes to seek a job. Nations educate their people to maintain and foster the very system which they want to maintain and foster. The University of the West Indies and all those other so-called universities throughout Africa, they are literally miseducating their people to a system that no longer exists. They are educating their people to a colonial system that the world has long moved forward on another sophisticated level. And then you look around and you see the common man pushing his cart, riding his bicycle, hustling and bustling every day throughout this nation. Some has made it, put that made in quotation, to Viren's level. But why is it they are able to do better than those who are educated? So we say the illiterate in this country is doing better than the educated. How can that be possible in any country? But remember, we are using doing better within a particular context. Why is it that a man that is so-called illiterate can drive a Mercedes-Benz and a man with a doctorate degree has to take public transportation and get up every day and talk about he can't find a job? That is the true illiteracy. The educated class is the most illiterate set of people that this country has. You don't want to hear it, but I'm going to tell it to you.